Hello guys and girls, Screezilla here, and I hope you're all well. And, well, I'm going to introduce this video a little bit differently. My name's Carl Anthony Wilkinson, originally. And today I'm going to be doing a story on my granddad, Les Wilkinson. He unfortunately passed away at the beginning of this year. And this is an article called Then and Now from the Thames Fleet. And it's an article which he wrote some pieces on and did a little piece in it. And I just wanted to read it and get his story across, because it's a very interesting little story. He had a very interesting little naval career, but I'll talk more about that after I've finished. Now, I will apologise if there's some slight pauses as I switch between pages. I am reading these off my computer with a scanned-in version of the print, which is in a bit of low quality, so some of the words are a little bit difficult to make out. I will endeavour to not make too many stammers and mistakes, but if I do, please forgive me. Then and Now, Les Wilkinson, Thames Fleet. It all started in 1939, and after an indifferent schooling, and as war had been declared, I, in a fit of passion for my country, joined the Royal Navy as a boy. The winter of 1939 was cold and snowy, and I was sent to HMS Grange at Shortley. I well remember my first meal. It was sausage and mash, and very cold. Just what one needed after a cold, slow journey to the east coast. My first evening was also not too good, as we were playing football in the hut when the chief petty officer unwisely opened the door just as I had taken a powerful kick at the football, which just skimmed over his head. He never forgot me for the next 6 weeks of my initial training, nor forgave me. I'm sure he did not have a sense of humour, although the antics I was forced to go through on the parade ground for the next 6 weeks belies that. I spent a few months at Grange, and many of us enjoyed the famous mast, as it kept you away from trouble. Life at Grange could not be called easy, and a typical day was get up at 5:30 a.m, when one of us in the dormitory fetched a steaming tureen, a fanny, of key, cocoa, and some ship's biscuits. Quite inedible unless you dipped them in the boiling key. Then off to do some mundane chores such as cleaning the officers' mess or other messes. At 6:55 back to the dormitory for breakfast, and a change into blues with shoes, polished up nice and black. We were on the parade ground by 7:55 a.m, where we had various national anthems plus prayers, and a pep talk followed by a bit of marching. Then we went off to our various classrooms for schooling, on seamanship, navigation and the like, or to the gym for rope climbing, leaping over the box horse or swimming. At noon we stopped and returned to the dormitory for lunch. We had the afternoon off, which enabled us to catch up with our sewing, letter writing, or general things such as climbing the mast to get out the way. At 4 p.m. we were back on the parade ground, and then into our classrooms, or rowing boats, depending on the weather and time of year. At 6 p.m. we knocked off for supper, and then either had a film show, some of which were actually quite good, or swimming, or the gym, returning to the dormitory at 8 p.m, with lights out at 9:45 p.m. Saturday afternoon was free, and also Sunday after church, but we were not allowed out of the barracks. The routine had its rigorous side, and one instance is that I was standing in the heads one afternoon talking to another boy, when in walked a Marine, who was in fact acting military policeman. He had nabbed the boy I was with for smoking. So I'm just going to change page here. He made me and the boy go to the quarterdeck with him. We had no other options, and summoned the officer of the day, who charged the boy with smoking, and after smelling my fingers and telling me I looked too good to be true, charged me with being in the company of a smoker. I got 7 days jankers. This meant spending every afternoon running around the parade ground with rifle and pack, the former held in various positions, all painful, for 1 hour. After that we took field guns to pieces, carried them over to the other side of the parade ground and reassembled them. Not light work. In the evening, after schooling, we peeled spuds or the like for another hour. I found the punishment unjust, as I did not smoke, but became wary whenever I was at the heads thereafter. We were then sent to the Isle of Man, a great place. It was there I was taught, among other things, the fine art of providing a light for those boys who were smokers. This was achieved by rolling up a piece of newspaper into a spill, putting a piece of silver paper on the end, dipping the end into a tin of black boot polish, and then removing the light bulb and pushing the spill into the light socket. After a bit of a bang and a flash, hey presto, the paper caught a light and the smokers were appeased. I must stress that this should not be attempted now by anyone under the age of 90, and then only in the supervision of their parents. The Isle of Man routine was much easier, and we were allowed into the main town, Douglas. But on a pay of 1 shilling a week, the scope was limited, and walking was the usual order of the day, as buses cost money. I was posted to Portsmouth to await a ship in September of 1940, and secured a plump job of sweeping the deck and polishing the brass on Nelson's flagship HMS Victory, and enjoyed that for 4 weeks, but was then posted to HMS Barrack, a county-class cruiser built for the China station. We were in Portsmouth on January the 10th, 1941, when the Germans knocked the place down. It was a very noisy night, and the devastation and death the next morning was not pretty. We stayed in dock at Portsmouth for a few weeks, and then went to Plymouth, in time for that to be knocked down too by the Jerrys. We only stayed a few days and then went north and ended up in the Val Fjord in Iceland, which became our shelter and safe haven for quite a while. There was nothing to do there other than cross-country running over the mountains, which I tried out from time to time. I enjoyed the Navy, but never thought of making a career of it, unless I could do so in the tropics. One became fed up with the ice and snow and freezing temperatures. I never did get the tropics, but was ever hopeful. We took one of the first convoys to go to Russia, which was quite uneventful, as we could not find it, and indeed began to think some 30 ships did not exist. We found it one day out of Murmansk, and as Germany had not had any better luck than us finding the convoy, we arrived unmolested. We anchored in Carl Inlet, where we had an amusing incident. This is apart from the one of the destroyer running ashore and having to be pulled off a bank in howling blizzards. We had to put a signalman ashore to climb up the hill to the signal tower. He came back quite frightened, as he had heard wolves howling, and quite rightly demanded an escort. It seemed it was my turn. So he and I headed up the hill. We heard some howling, but were told by the big blonde Russian interpreter that it was wild dogs. She offered me a lift down the hill in her troika, pulled by 2 horses. It was a very frightening ride, and I felt at one stage that the horses might jump onto the troika for a ride down themselves, but we arrived at the bottom quite safely. I did not get another turn at escort duty, and we left there a couple of days later, loaded with airmen who had been sent to Russia to teach the Russians how to fly the Hurricanes. Our journey back was not good, as we found another gale and very rough sea. The poor passengers suffered greatly, but we got them safely back to the Scarpa floe, and then returned to Iceland. We did a number of trips in and around Iceland and Russia, and the weather was, in the main, awful. It was dark in the winter when we had about half an hour's daylight, and in the summer there was 23 to 24 hours of daylight. We saw the Northern Lights quite often, and the skipper told us that after the war people would pay a vast sum of money to see what we were seeing as boys, for 4 shillings a fortnight. I do not think we were greatly elated by this. The Barrack had an open bridge, and my station was on it. In the early days, when you bought a cup of tea, it had a thin layer of ice on it. Then the engineers finally fitted a steam pipe to the bridge, so one could attain a fanny of tea and bring it back to the boil. It was good to finally be in the modern century at last. Watchkeeping was obligatory, and we did 4 hours on and 4 hours off, night and day, for as long as we were at sea, sometimes up to 3 weeks. I think the cold kept us fit. We often ran with a large trawler on the northern patrols, which on an average lasted 2 weeks, and we usually endeavoured to meet it every other day in the early evening, up where the sea turned to ice. It was a very pretty sight indeed. One evening we had to take a very sick seaman with a mastoid, and he'd come over by the way of Breach's Buoy. Our medics operated, and when we returned to Valfjord about 10 days later, he was shipped off to England, well on the way to recovery. The BBC in those days was running a programme called Into Battle, and that incident featured on an episode of it. Sadly, one evening the trawler did not keep up its rendezvous with us. We searched for about 2 days, tracking the ice barrier and the ship's presumed course, but nothing was found, and it was assumed lost with all hands. At one time, we came south at Rosyth, for reasons I do not remember, or did not know, but possibly to refuel. Boys were not told a lot back then. Gracie Fields was singing at the theatre, and afterwards I went aboard HMS Prince of Wales to see some old classmates. She had been hit by a shell or two from a German capital ship, who we had probably shadowed, hence Rosyth. Sorry, Rosyth. I can never pronounce that name. The next day, she sailed for Singapore and was sunk later in her life. I never heard from my friends after that, so presumed they went down with her. My ship then sailed back to Iceland, and north yet again. I've not gone into the saga of the Russian convoys, as they are well documented and must by now make boring reading. I did get the medal given by the Russian government, but the English government seems declined to give medals, and at last count has offered us a tin badge. Some historians may disagree, but I was there at the age of 16 years. One of, but not the youngest, and they were not. We returned to England after about 19 months, when I left the ship to go on an ASDEC course at Campbellton. I then joined a small Hunt-class destroyer, HMS Southdown, based at Harwich, on more convoy duty, taking southbound convoys through the Straits of Dover, plus chasing German E-boats. Tedious work, but exciting on occasion. My ASDEC cabin was on the bridge, and was made partly of glass. It was a bit hairy being shot at behind plate glass, but we all survived. One morning we picked up 2 American flyers. They had been in their small boat for 4 days, one with a bullet wound to his stomach. We had no doctor on board, but did what we could, and took them back to Harwich. They both survived and came back some weeks later to thank us, which was very much appreciated. Our first lieutenant, who was a cousin of the then Queen, arranged for a troupe of windmill girls to come to Harwich Dockyard Theatre to give us a performance one evening. That was spectacular, especially as they came aboard Southdown after the show. I was quartermaster that evening and could not see the show, but had the joy of greeting each of the girls as they came aboard. It was also my duty to see that they left the ship at midnight, which they did after some persuading, which I did enjoy myself. We came into Chatham at the end of 1943 for a dinky boiler clean, about 8 days. But by that time I was in poor state and coughing up blood. I was asked to walk up to Chatham Hospital, it's on a hill, and there was examined, x-rays, etc., etc., and sent back to the ship, still walking. We sailed 2 days later. We were somewhere off Goodwin's when the skipper opened the door to my ASDEC cabin and said my relief was coming up to the bridge. He told me I was to go and pack, as I was very sick. I assembled my gear on the upper deck, and when the lighter appeared, it took me to Gravesend Jetty. I was put ashore and then had to carry my case, kit bag and stuff up the length of the jetty, where 2 sick bay attendants met me. They asked me to put my stuff on the ambulance, and then got me on the stretcher, as I was not allowed to walk. Although, obviously done all that walking beforehand. It would have been nice if they met him at the jetty. I did not walk again for some weeks. One morning a Rear Admiral came to my bedside and thanked me for my service to the Royal Navy and discharged me as unfit with a 100% disability pension. £2 per week in those days. Attributed to war service, and that was the end of my naval career. After almost 2 years in sanitariums and hospitals, I survived and was lucky. What happened next is another story, maybe not as exciting but quite fulfilling. Les Wilkinson. Now, my granddad contracted tuberculosis in 1943, hence coughing up quite a bit of blood. He was in very rough shape and by all accounts shouldn't have made it, but he was a strong man and never gave up, and he did not give up for sure. He made it well. He had to have a lung removed, and while he was basically bedridden for 2 years, taught himself law, he taught himself all new options and new careers, and made a great career for himself. He was a great man, and he's going to be missed. I love this article because you get a bit of his dry wit coming out. He had a very good sense of humour, and that's the thing I will remember most about him. One of the things that really stands out is his talking of the Prince of Wales. Now, the Prince of Wales had just docked after being escorted with HMS Hood. I don't know if he didn't mention that because of the memories of what had happened to the Hood, but it could also be the fact that Grandad was very he was very blasé about some things. He would just say things, without caring. Just a German capital ship, not the Bismarck, just a German capital ship, just some German ship. That's the character he was. Now, he joined Barrack after it came back from the Mediterranean. He joined it just after its refit and repairs, after it had been attacked by the Hipper in the Mediterranean theatre. The Barrack survived the war and was broken up in about 1960, I think. She had a relatively stellar career. Nothing spectacular, but did an amazing job on the patrols and the escort duty through the Arctic convoys. HMS Southdown, again, didn't have a stellar sort of history. It wasn't one of those most famous ships in the world, but it survived. And it was, again, broken up post-war. It's odd for my granddad to have served on 2 ships that were very lucky not to go into much action, but he lost a lot of friends in the war and didn't particularly like talking about it, and I do understand why. This article is one of the biggest ones I have from him of talking about the wartime stuff, really. He didn't talk to me much about it, and as I said, I completely understand that. He passed at the age of 93, which, absolutely a great innings. He did incredibly well, and he is an absolute hero of mine, as I said. He inspires me to keep going and keep strong. He really, he really did make me feel good. And with my disabilities and issues, physically, he inspired me to keep going. Anyway, enough of that, before I start getting all emotional. I just wanted to do this little episode, and I may do some more in the future. Now, if you have anyone you would like to spotlight, please let me know. And if you did enjoy this, let me know as well, because I may do some more little episodes on the people, some history of people who served in this time period in the future. And if you have any family members that, you know, have a little bit of a story from the wars, I would love to feature them. Okay guys, thank you so much for listening, and rest in peace, Grandad, you will be missed. Thank you very much. This is Carl Wilkinson out. Bye bye.